Hello, fellow birders. My name is Denis Kania. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at the vireos without wing bars that show up in DuPage County. On the DuPage Birding Club Education channel, we'll be discussing all things bird related. And as I mentioned, today we'll be looking at vireos, the ones that do not have wing bars. And here we have those vireos. We have RedEyed Vireo here, Philadelphia Vireo, Warbling Vireo, and then I've also thrown in Tennessee Warbler. You can see that all four of these species have a very similar color scheme, and the facial patterns are very similar as well. So that's what leads to the confusion, and we're going to try and sort that out. So here's a graph from the data collected at Fermilab over the last 33 years, and it reflects Philadelphia Vireo as a migrant coming in May, and it's a pretty tight window that they migrate in May. And then we don't see them again until the latter part of August and all through September, and maybe with luck into the very beginning of October. Warbling Vireo and RedEyed Vireo are both breeding species for us, and they both come in around late April, early May, and they're with us through the breeding season and all the way through the month of September. RedEyed Vireos this year showed up quite late, and I didn't start seeing them until about the second half of May. So here is that RedEyed Vireo. It's our larger Vireo, and you can see that it has a very distinctive head pattern. It has a very gray crown, and you can see that there's a marginal crown stripe that is very dark, just a thin line that is on the margin of the crown, and then it also has a very well-defined eye line. And so those two features in combination with the supercilium in between gives you kind of a stark pattern. And it's certainly a stronger pattern than you're going to see on any of the other vireos that we'll be discussing today. So a very unique pattern there. As all the other vireos have, you'll have kind of an olivey back, and there'll be some yellow tones in the under parts of the bird. In particular, on the RedEyed Vireo, it's more towards in the flanks and more strong in the lower flanks, and actually the undertail coverage will be yellowish. We know right off the bat that this is a Vireo just because of the fact that it does have this very strong bill. Much chunkier than any of our warbler bills, and there is a small hook at the very end. And you'll also note that the feet of all of our Vireos in North America have blue color, so that does stand out in these images. So then we have two other Vireos to talk about. This one is the Philadelphia Vireo, and these are a little more problematic. They're closer in appearance than they are with the RedEyed Vireo. So again, we have a grayish crown. We do not have that marginal crown stripe here. It may be slightly darker here, but it's not that same kind of stripe that we saw. And you can see then that there is a whitish supercilium, and you can see an eye line that's developed here. Maybe a little better here. You can see it, the profile's a little better. But you can see that there is a thin eye line here. It's not very strong, but it is present. And you can see that the supercilium is strong, but dies out very quickly behind the eye, kind of curls down, and then we lose it very quickly. So that's very distinctive. Another feature that we would want to consider for Philadelphia Vireo is the yellow across the breast. As I mentioned, all of our Vireos are going to have some yellowish wash on the underparts. This one, you'll see that the yellow is strongest in the center of the upper breast, and it actually thins out and lightens as it gets away from that central area. And again, you can see yellowish undertail coverage here. Even on this washed out individual, you can see that the yellow here in the center, this bird's head is turned, so actually the center is more or less right here. You can see it's strongest in the center and then fades out. Again, we have that strong Vireo type bill. It's a chunkier bill with a little hook on the end of it, and you can see those blue feet. So here's our third Vireo, and this one is sometimes confused with the Philadelphia. It has a lot of the same characteristics. That facial pattern is very similar. The crown is very much the same. Again, it's a gray crown lacking a very strong marginal crown stripe. You can see that the facial pattern does reflect some of the same things. The eye line is much weaker on Philadelphia or on Warbling Vireo, but you can see that the supercilium is actually stronger and it's more pronounced. and actually goes well beyond behind the eye here. And so maybe in this individual looks a little more diffused, but still noticeable and going well behind the eye, unlike the Philadelphia Vireo. The breast color, there is a little shadow running through here that kind of complicates things, but if you look at both of these individuals carefully, you'll see that the strongest part of the yellow is going to be in the flanks, and it's actually weaker in the center of the breast. That's more obvious here. But once again, if you get down to the undertail coverts, they are yellowish. We have that grayish olive back on both of these individuals, and we did have that on the Philadelphia Vireo as well, which I failed to mention. Strong bill, blue feet, indicating that it's a Vireo. So our last species that I wanted to discuss is something that is closely related in color scheme to those Vireos that we just discussed. So if you look at that facial pattern, it's kind of reminiscent of what we were talking about with the Vireos. The whole color scheme is more or less reminiscent, but there are differences, certainly. This warbler does have a much thinner bill, comes to a much sharper point. It's very obvious here. And so that sets it apart from the Vireos. It also has dark legs. I admit that this looks slightly bluish here. I think that's just the way the light is hitting it. But if you see these birds in the field, generally they're going to look much darker to you. They won't have that bluish look that we got from the Vireos. Tennessee Warblers tend to be more bright green on the back than any of those Vireos. And the undertail coverts on Tennessees will always be very white. So that will set it apart from any of the Vireos as well. So keep these features in mind. That red-eyed Vireo does have a very unique crown pattern. It's a solid gray crown with the dark marginal crown stripe. And it does have a strong eye line. And those two features set the supercilium apart and make it look very conspicuous. Philadelphia Vireo and Warbling Vireo do have an eye line, but it's much weaker. And the Warbling Vireo does have a longer supercilium that extends behind the eye. The Philadelphia Vireo, as you recall, does have a supercilium, but it ends very quickly behind the eye, kind of curving down around it. Both the Philadelphia Vireo and Warbling Vireo do have yellowish areas on the underparts, especially in the fall. But on a Philadelphia Vireo, that darkest area of yellow will always be in the upper central breast, and it gets weaker as you move away from that area. Warbling Vireo is just the opposite, and the strongest yellow on those Vireos will be in the flanks and gets weaker as it gets towards the center of the breast. Tennessee Warbler can be separated out by that very thin bill, the white undertail coverts, and the brighter green mantle. So thanks for taking the time to view this video. Hopefully we can have given you some bird food for thought, and I hope you'll join us again in the future as we explore all things bird related.